Well, I am not prepared to cover this topic, but it is something that needs to be talked about right now. We need to talk about Hamas, and we need to talk about the Israeli-Palestine conflict, which I know is definitely not... I'm not really dressed appropriately for that, but I don't really have much of a choice over when this thing comes on. Let's be honest. But we need to go over the history of the Israeli-Palestine conflict, and hopefully that'll give us a little perspective for what's going on right now. So we're going to do a bit of a timeline, and I want to go ahead and get something out of the way first. So there are some people who will enter this particular conversation saying that to understand the Israeli-Palestine conflict, you have to go back thousands of years to the philosophical ideologies and the particular prophets that the Jewish people and the Muslim people believed actually spoke for their religion. And you really don't. You actually don't. Anybody that tries to frame it that way is trying to frame a conflict like this as one of pure ideology, and therefore frame it as something that was always inevitable and could never really be avoided. This was going to happen no matter what, but that's not really true. If we go back only about 100 years, we'll find that after waging war with the Ottoman Empire, Britain ended up double-dealing with what would later become the State of Israel and the current Ottoman Empire as they were dividing up territories with France. Basically, they end up promising the same plot of land for Palestinians and what would later become Israel. These are agreements which are obviously in conflict with one another. Britain's double dealings seem to be a very, very common occurrence when we go back and turn the pages of history. But if you look at the... Said not now. Oh, I'm looking at that there. But if you go back to 1949, once the State of Israel is officially created, there's a series of truces that are signed for with all of the Arabian countries that had actually declared war on the State of Israel after the previous double dealings with Britain went into agreements. Under the 1949 agreement, the Gaza Strip was originally put under Egypt's control. Fast forward to November of 1956, the United Nations at that point called for France, Britain, and Israel to withdraw all of their troops from Egypt. And then we have to fast forward another 10 years, June of 1967, the Six-Day War happens, and this is when Israel gains full control over the Gaza Strip. Now, the Gaza Strip is basically the tiny, tiny bit of land that is 80% covered on one end by Israel and like 20% covered on the other end by Egypt, and then the rest of its border is just in water. Like, they're basically locked between these nations. 1973, Egypt and Syria try to persuade Israel to negotiate better terms for Arabic countries, which we can see how that ended up turning out in where we are right now. Once you get to 1979, Israel and Egypt sign a peace treaty at the White House, which leads to Israel's complete withdrawal from the Sinai Peninsula. The two countries agreed on the framework of allowing self-rule for Palestinians, people who were in the Gaza Strip, allowing them to live in the Israel-occupied territories. And then 3 years later, Ronald Reagan expressed his full support for the full autonomy with some Jordanian supervision. But then, of course, Israel rejects that plan. So we fast forward another 8 years, go to December of 1987. Palestinians living in the West Bank of Gaza start what is called the First Intifada against Israel. This is when the Muslim Brotherhood members form Hamas, which we now know as the terrorist organization that has majority control in Gaza. Now, what is an intifada? It's basically shorthand for a removal of. So a removal of all Jewish people or a removal of all Israeli influence from the region. That's what the intifada is supposed to be. Then when you get to 1993, the Oslo Accords are signed. The two-state solution is then proposed for what I believe is the first time, and this is where Hamas, terrorist organization that they are, decide to respond to those ideas with suicide bombings over the next 5 years. Now, what is the two-state solution? Well, remember how I said that originally this land was divided, not really properly divided, but promised to Israel and Palestine. As Israel and Palestine both warred for control over this territory, basically the only solution that could come up after a while was the idea to divide the territory in such a way that Israel would control a certain percentage of it and Palestine would control another percentage of it. And then there would be some area in the middle that is controlled by both of them that would converge on Jerusalem. Now, there's a bit of a problem with the way this has been proposed over the years. One of the first ways this two-state solution was proposed, and this is one of the reasons why there was so many issues with it when it came out, was Israel would control, I believe it was like 69, 70% of the region, with Palestine controlling 30% of the region, but Israel had like a third of the population of Palestine at the time. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense for them to control more of the region than the side that actually had more people in it. But apparently that's what was proposed, and of course that was shot down. That doesn't say that suicide bombings are a good thing in any way, shape, or form, but we'll get into more about Hamas later. We've got some stuff to talk about where they are concerned. So in September of 2000, a few months after negotiations between Israel and Palestine reached an impasse at Camp David, the Second Intifada began, another attempt to try to remove all of Israeli influence from the Gaza Strip and from the region, to try to take over area that Palestine basically said, this belongs to us. We had these agreements after the Ottoman Empire fell. This led to Palestinian youth throwing stones at Israeli police, and then support for Hamas continues to grow within Palestine because of its readiness to fight Israel here. So the thing with Hamas begins as a terrorist organization where their entire idea is eliminate Israel off the map. Get them completely out of the Middle East, tell them to fuck off and go somewhere else. And while that's not initially the most popular sentiment in Palestine, eventually that will change, because whether they legitimately win an election or not, eventually Hamas goes from internal terrorist organization that works within the Gaza Strip to the ruling power there. They actually get voted in as the ruling power after a while. That's we'll get into that. We'll get into that. So is Gaza wanting to be sovereign or a state of Palestine? So Gaza is basically the open-air prison that would become Palestine if they had their own autonomy. They don't, though. So, fun thing. As of right now, Palestine is a state that is only recognized by 138 of the 193 United Nations member states. It has been recognized that way and has a status as a non-member observer state in the United Nations right now. In 1947, going back, Jinmir says, seen some weirdos calling Palestinians the real invaders because Jewish people own that land in the year 900 and archaeological something or other, like we don't live in 2023. Yeah, that's a weird take. That's a weird take. The issue is that the state of Israel was established in land that was Palestinian already. But going forward, in September of 2005, Israeli troops end up pulling out of Gaza again, but Israel comes under criticism for restricting the movement of Palestinians coming in and out of the Strip. This is when the real beginnings of the open-air prison camp status of Gaza starts to really come to fruition. In January 2006, after the death of the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, who I'm really bad at pronouncing, the co-founder of the paramilitary organization Fatah, Hamas actually wins their parliamentary election. And then 1 year after that, Hamas seizes control of the entire Gaza Strip, routing all of the internal Fatah forces. So now you get to the point where Hamas is in majority control over all of that area. In response to rocket fire from Gaza, then, Israel launches an attack on Hamas in December of 2008 that kills 200 Palestinians. Shortly after, they open a ground war against Hamas, which leads to 1,200 more Palestinians being killed, with only 13 Israelis being killed. This is actually something that you're going to see a lot going forward in this conflict, is that for every one Israeli troop that dies, there tends to be at least 10 troops on the side of Hamas that die. But it's not always troops from Hamas. The issue with this war isn't just, or the issue with this conflict has not always just been that soldiers are dying. The issue is that it's being fought in civilian areas. The issue is that it's not just Hamas reactionaries that are being attacked. It's also Palestinian civilians and Israeli civilians who get attacked. In January 2009, Israel and Palestine groups declare a unilateral ceasefire for a little bit of time. But about 2 years before this, development of the Iron Dome begins. So the Iron Dome is, of course, the anti-missile defense system that Israel has had for a while now, and its relevance will come into play again in just a second. But the first Iron Dome batteries officially go into deployment in 2011. After that, in 2012, Israel kills Ahmad al-Jabari, who is Hamas's military chief, which of course means even more violence ends up happening there. Just getting rid of the military chief does not suddenly stop the conflict. And then, of course, on the other side, in 2014, Hamas kidnaps and kills 3 Israeli teenagers, which promotes more attacks from Israel, and then rocket launches from Gaza, which, of course, get knocked out by the Iron Dome defense system. This conflict ends up killing 1,881 Palestinians and 60 Israelis. Fast forward again, like I said, that was going to be a running theme here. Fast forward again to 2021 in May. Israeli police raid a mosque in Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is considered the third holiest site in Islam. This sets off what's called the 11-day war, or an 11-day war between Israel and Hamas, and this kills more than 200 Palestinians and a little more than 10 Israelis. Again, every single time one of these conflicts happens, there's a small number of Israeli forces or civilians who die, and then a larger number of Palestinians who die. And then this year, on October 7th, this is one of the, there's a thing that happened very recently. There's 2 things. A couple days before that, there was a moment where Hamas dragged, beat, and raped a woman on camera, and people have been putting their eyes on the Israeli conflict once more as a result of this. But on October 7th, Hamas enacted a missile operation that claimed to fire 50,000 missiles at Israel in an attempt to overwhelm the Iron Dome defense, and it actually did overwhelm the Iron Dome defense. So historically, when Hamas sends missile attacks at Israel, every year they lose anywhere between 4 and 6 people to missile attacks. A very, very staggeringly small amount of people to military offense until now. We actually don't know, as of right now, the full scope of damage that has happened as a result of those missiles firing. At least I haven't seen the full scope of that damage yet, or have numbers available for that as of right now. Did anybody explain how Hamas invaded, but there was, like, no IDF around? So there's also another bit of information in this that I need to bring forward, and I'm going to find it real quick here. Big Joel posted about it, and it's a huge, huge issue. But apparently, Benjamin Netanyahu actively supported Hamas in its earlier days in order to undermine Palestine. Said effectively, Netanyahu is basically leader of Israel right now. Effectively, Netanyahu's entire worldview collapsed over the course of a single day. He was convinced that if he could make deals with corrupt Arab tyrants while ignoring the cornerstone of the Arab-Jewish conflict, the Palestinians, his life's work was to turn the ship of state from the course steered by his predecessors, from Yitzhak Rabin to Ehud Olmert, and make the two-state solution basically impossible. En route to this goal, he found a partner in Hamas. He said anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. He told a meeting of his Likud party's members in March of 2019. So this is part of our strategy, to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. So from what we can tell, it seems like Netanyahu's plan, as of right now, is to piggyback off of the violent extremism of Hamas to do what President Nixon did with the drug war in America. You can't get rid of the black people and the Mexicans in America, but you can associate them with crack and pot and then illegalize those drugs in order to attack those communities. You can't, on the global stage, simply invade and attack Palestine and take all that territory for yourself, but you can paint all support for it as legitimate through the eyes of Hamas, a noted terrorist organization. Said, let us all at least agree Hamas is better than Hamas. True. So, that's one of the more recent pieces of awkward information I found when doing some study for this. And here's the thing. I am not an expert on geopolitics. In fact, I only recently started doing a ton of research into this leading up to knowing that I would be doing a video on this conflict because I wanted to make sure that I had my ducks in a row at least as much as I could. Which is why shit like this is a problem. A lot of people on the right and the left don't actually take any time to study the history of this conflict and fall back into the whole, this is a conflict of ideology going back thousands of years, when barely anybody involved in the actual conflict gives a flying fuck about which prophet was more important. It's mostly an argument over land and who has the ability to control that land. Now, before I cover this, I do want to note there was a video, or there was a interview with one of the leaders of Hamas that I wish I had the video for still, but he was asked the hostages that Hamas has taken from Israel, many of which are elderly, infirm, and children. He was asked, what will you do with those hostages? And he said, well, we have a long track record of treating our hostages well. And then when asked, okay, well, would you be okay with a two-state solution? Would you be okay with making sure that these people are not only safe, but people who have their generational homes in Israel are able to maintain that, are able to continue living in the country they were born in? And his response basically was to go, you don't understand, you don't understand. And then went into a tirade about how Hamas was going to take over all of Israel for them. And it said, did she base this on a fucking Risk game she once played? Yeah, no, it's... And then, of course, we get this shit. I do this to say there are idiots on both sides of this conflict, and I am no expert on geopolitics. I don't know what the resolution is to this. What I'm not going to do is do what some people have done on Twitter where they'll go, oh, I'm not going to talk about the ethics of laying a siege on the Gaza Strip and cutting all of the power to the civilians in Gaza. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say I don't know what the right solution is here. I don't. I'm no expert. I can say that cutting power to civilian infrastructure is inhumane, but one of the tactics that have been used on both sides of this conflict have generally been inhumane. The issue you run into, though, is that on one hand, this particular conflict is something that was going to escalate eventually if a solution was not agreed upon by both sides. But that doesn't justify the way in which it has been escalated. It doesn't justify the killing of civilians. It doesn't justify parading them around in the streets the way that they have been. It doesn't justify the choking of the Gaza Strip that Israel's doing to Palestine. It doesn't justify the ways that Palestine is desecrating the corpses of fucking Israelis. It doesn't justify any of that shit. I understand bad things happen in war, but it astounds me the lengths at which human beings will go to just simply destroy each other instead of coexisting. But let's go ahead and get to the article now that it's taken us 20 minutes of going through the history of this particular conflict so that we have context for people who might not have that context yet. An Israeli lawmaker is apparently calling for her nation's military to use nuclear warfare in response to attacks by Hamas. I would like to remind people, real quick, let's see here. Where is the Gaza Strip? I would like to remind people that the Gaza Strip is located... Yeah. So, let's open this image in a new tab. Of course, it's going to take forever. So we've got the West Bank here, which is supposed to be controlled by Palestine as well. And then we've got the Gaza Strip here, which is where a lot of the conflict is happening at the moment. This is the area that's being considered basically an open-air prison. So she's basically saying, let's nuke the Gaza Strip, which is right next to Israel. Let me repeat that. She wants to nuke her feet. She wants to nuke the place right next to Israel. That radioactive fallout will spread to the rest of their country. That is a suicidal idea. That is a completely suicidal idea. So also, Israel's not supposed to even have nukes, but that's not stopped anybody from taking them away, since we know about them decades ago. See, even if it wasn't suicide, it makes it unusable if they want the land. Yep. Rebatul Tali Gottlieb, an Israeli lawyer and member of the Knesset for Likud, published multiple posts advocating for a forceful retaliation following a surprise attack on Gaza. On Saturday, at the hands of the militant Palestinian group designated a terrorist organization by the United States. More than 1,600 combined Israelis and Palestinians have reportedly been killed since Hamas launched their attacks, according to the Associated Press, and hundreds of others have been injured. Hamas has reportedly taken an unknown number of hostages as the conflict has escalated, which I just talked on. And then, of course, he says, Jericho missile, strategic alert. Before considering the introduction of forces, doomsday weapon. This is my opinion. May God preserve all our strength, Gottlieb wrote on Twitter, according to a translation. Another post says, I urge you to do everything and use doomsday weapons fearlessly against our enemies, adding that Israel must use everything in its arsenal. On Tuesday, she continued with her calls for urgency. Only an explosion that shakes the Middle East will restore this country's dignity, strength, and security. It's time to kiss doomsday, shooting powerful missiles without limit, not flattening a neighborhood, crushing and flattening Gaza, without mercy, without mercy. This is the unhinged rant of a supervillain. Senior fellow at Nikolai Sukov, senior fellow at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, told Newsweek that loose talk regarding nuclear weapons has become prevalent and more commonplace in recent years due to the war in Ukraine and now the escalation in Gaza. Said part of it is understandable due to serious security crises, a lack of knowledge about nuclear weapons, visible political positions, and more people generally pondering the use of such weapons and effects on a global scale. For Israel, such loose talks is perhaps even more damaging because the country does not even admit it has nuclear weapons, so an indirect confirmation is not really good for its image. Is everything in your arsenal like the 10-page peace treaty? Depraved Ambience says, I feel like it's important to remember that Hamas isn't the leadership of Palestine. They're an extremist terrorist organization, not a governing body. You can't both sides this fairly when one group is a state government. Depraved Ambience, Hamas did get control over Palestine. Like, they did. Let's see here. The 2006. They won an election in 2006. They won 74 of the 132 seats there. Like, they were elected. To argue that they weren't is to ignore the fact that they did. Said you can't both sides this fairly. Yes, the fuck I can. I can both sides this. It's very easy to both sides this when both sides are doing stupid shit. That's incredibly easy to do. So, you can tell me I can't, but I did, and it's very simple to do so. Doesn't take long. So one side is bad, Hamas, one side is worse, Israel. No, I don't agree that Hamas is bad and Israel's worse. I don't. So what I mean is that they aren't recognized on the world stage as a legitimate government, and they don't have access to anywhere near the same level of state power as Israel. But yeah, what I said was wrong. Oops. So it doesn't seem like an equal both sides, though. I mean, here's the thing. I'm not going to say that... So, I have to say that Hamas, what they're doing is pure evil. Sending 50,000 missiles into a country is a horrible thing to do. Parading their corpses in the street is a horrible thing to do. Holding hostages the way they are doing is a horrible thing to do. At the same time, the things Israel has been doing, strangulating the Gaza Strip, creating an open-air prison, hell, basically creating the perfect extremist environment for an organization like Hamas to grow in, is also a bad thing. Can I say which one is worse? No, because it wouldn't be honest for me to say which one is worse, because I don't know. I can tell you the information that I have. Said, oh, absolutely, terrorism is bad. I don't agree with that statement either. So terrorism is just what happens when you try to enact violence for political change that is not state-sanctioned. That's what terrorism is. That's what the word means. Which means the American Revolution was bad. Which means any time that a group of people who have been under an authoritarian thumb has rebelled, that's been bad. It's always been bad, no matter who's doing it, apparently. Blanket statements like terrorism is bad ignores the material conditions of people who are living under state-sanctioned violence. I can't say what is worse or better or bad or good in this situation with full context, because I don't have the full context. I'm not a Palestinian kid waiting for my next meal to get denied because my parents just died randomly in a conflict. I'm using terrorism in a different way. I'm not including resistance in my usage, but resistance is necessarily part of the usage of the word terrorism. Like, any unlawful use of violence and intimidation in the pursuit of political aims, that's terrorism. Resistance necessarily is terrorism. It is impossible to divorce those two things. Said violence in general is bad. Violence in general is bad. We don't want to have to resort to violence. Nobody wants to ever have to resort to violence. There are times where people feel like they are pushed to it, though. Does it make the violence justified? Again, the honest answer for me here is, I don't know. I don't know. In a perfect world, these two sides would just agree on a two-state solution and fuck off. But obviously, that doesn't seem to be happening. Hold on. There we go. Gottlieb has apparently been a vocal critic of Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who, along with the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, previously issued a statement in defense of the Israeli Defense Forces, officials, and the security establishment. In September, she accused the IDF and Shin Bet, Israeli security agency, of working for Palestinian terrorists and security prisoners, according to the Jerusalem Post. After being condemned by the Israeli government for infuriating rhetoric, she doubled down and justified attacks by lawmakers on domestic military personnel. Netanyahu has waged a war against Hamas and promised to reduce the terrorists to rubble, and that they will remember for decades to come. However, he's faced renewed criticism for alleged security and intelligence failures that preceded the deadliest attack on Israeli soil in more than 5 decades. So the context for that one right there, the 50,000 missile strike and the follow-up by thousands of Hamas militants, that happened without any warning from Israeli intelligence. So Israel's supposed to have one of the most ironclad defense systems and one of the best spy networks. And yet apparently they had zero information, zero knowledge, zero foresight about what happened on October 7th. It's been pretty accurately described that October 7th, 2023 is Israel's 9/11. The moment where everything just blew open, and the only thing anybody can ask is, how the fuck did you not see that coming? How did you not have any fingers in the pies necessary to figure that shit out? But I don't know which case had the glider idea. So Mirlana says, I support a no-state solution. Everybody gets sent to a corner and can have governments when they show they're mature enough to use them. Jesus Christ. Striker says, no defense is ironclad. If you throw enough at it, it fails. Well, yeah, that makes sense for the missile defense system. They literally threw enough missiles at it for it to fail. But a no-state solution where literally, the entire area gets dissolved, nobody would be happy on that one. But maybe that's the way you do compromises. Let's see here. One day after criticizing Netanyahu, the left-leaning newspaper Haaretz on Tuesday ran an op-ed with the headline, Netanyahu resign now. It said he's irresponsible for the worst failure in the country's history. So, I hate to be the one that covers a topic like this and can't give you guys anything conclusive. But I feel like the problem in this conflict for people who are not living in the blast zone, as it were, the problem for a lot of us is that none of us have enough context for this scenario, for what's going on right now, to do anything other than condemn the violence as we see it. Which side is right, which side is wrong, I don't know. You have one side that's been basically strangulated and politically positioned by Netanyahu, and then you have another side that is basically operating off of treaties that Britain set up years ago. Do we just end this by saying blame the British? This was their problem. They should have figured this shit out after the dissolvement of the Ottoman Empire? That doesn't get us anywhere, though. Aha! We pointed our finger at the crown, and now the bloodshed and violence is continuing. I wish I could give you guys something more concrete than this, but the most I can do is give an analysis over what's happened up until this point and some of the batshit insane takes people have had on this. But this entire time of sitting down on Twitter and looking at everybody's responses to this and seeing a lot of people, even on the left, openly supporting Hamas and all of the terrible shit they're doing, it baffles me. The things that they're doing, irregardless of them being done in response to the strangulation, the types of things that they've been doing, the overwhelming missiles being aimed at civilian infrastructure, the parading of people in the streets, the way that they are operating with their children that they have kept prisoner, all that shit. I think it's perfectly reasonable to condemn all of that. I don't think it's wrong to condemn all of that. And it's wrong to condemn the ways in which Israel has basically politically maneuvered Palestine into a corner and created an open-air prison in the Gaza Strip. It's perfectly reasonable to condemn both of those things. You don't have to come down on one side of this because you think it's the right side. It's perfectly reasonable for both sides to be equally wrong. And also to point a finger at the British. That's also a thing you get to do. But ultimately, here in the West, we don't have the perspective of people who are living through these conditions right now. We don't have the perspective of people in Palestine who've had to deal with there's a particular type of missile thing that Israel's done where they fire a dud missile somewhere as a warning that in 15 minutes this area will be bombed. And then I don't know what it's like to live in Israel under the threat of missiles coming in and sometimes getting shot down by the Iron Dome and sometimes not. Like, I don't have the perspective of those people. I am not those people. What I can say, though, is that if either side in this conflict tries to do an all-or-nothing campaign, then all we're going to get is bloodshed, and we're not actually going to get any solutions. Not here. But, with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I know it's a very different video than normal because I can't give you guys anything concrete on this, but I feel like not giving something concrete on this is the honest answer. So, let me know. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already, and insert into the video tagline here. Alrighty, you've made it to the end of the video, which may or may not be a good thing, depending on which video I tack this fan art at the end of. But this one is from Worthless. It just goes to Star Prophecy Suris. The hair is very, very nice on this. I like it. The next one we have here is also from Worthless, saying I put a spoiler on it because it has a lot of skin showing, but it's not naked or anything. Star Omen Suris. Yeah, it's not quite naked, but it's getting there. It's getting there. The last one we have here is a very, very big and impressive piece from Aaron Primit. Said you're welcome to skip this fan art if you've already featured in the video. I don't remember if I have or not, but this one is basically a Slime Rancher Suris showing a bunch of stuff ranging from channel memes to Slime Suris himself. Just having a grand old time. I think it's fantastic. As always, thank you all for the fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop it in the fan art section of the Discord. With that said, though, maybe subscribe? Maybe do that. I don't know. We're going to the credits. The Necoin is boiling. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.